He never doubts that he is loved. And he never lets anyone tell him that he doesn't belong there.
Although the character was featured heavily in 2018's Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, audiences for Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse are receiving a ton more backstory on Gwen Stacy, voiced by Hailee Steinfeld, one of the more fascinating characters in the Sony slice of Marvel's cinematic universe. Of course, the character dates way back in the comics, long before any mention of multiverses, or even spider-people who aren't Peter Parker. Gwen Stacy is one of the more significant love interests in Peter Parker's comic book stories, whose tragic fate would not only shape the character for years to come, but also the history of comic book storytelling itself.
Whatever?
Wow.
Whatever?
So are you like a cow or a Dalmatian?
I am.
Though her iconic status pales in comparison to Peter's more wild and passionate romance with Mary Jane Watson, many comic book fans prefer to see Gwen as the love of Peter Parker's life, even if her creators eventually decided the two weren't meant to be. Gwen Stacy could have simply served as a plot device in the story of Peter Parker. Instead, her popularity among Marvel fans has taken her from damsel in distress to a superhero in her own right. No longer the relatively straightforward love interests once portrayed by Emma Stone and Bryce Dallas Howard in live-action Spider-Man movies, the Spider-Verse films portray Gwen as far more competent, complicated, and commanding. Rewinding to her earliest comic book origins, the character has always stood out. When Gwen Stacy was first introduced in 1965's The Amazing Spider-Man number 31, Marvel's friendly neighborhood superhero had only been around for about 3 years, although he had become one of Marvel's most popular characters in that short amount of time. Peter Parker encountered his fair share of romantic interests during those early years. There was Betty Brant, Liz Allen, and of course, Mary Jane, who somewhat mirrored Peter's attraction towards superheroism in her own attraction to the Spider-Man persona. The introduction of Gwen Stacy would be important for the Peter character and for Stan Lee as well. Many comic book interpretations of Gwen Stacy, as well as adaptations in film and TV, have depicted her and Peter Parker as high school sweethearts, even flirtatious prior to Peter being bitten by the radioactive spider. In Stacy's comic book debut, however, she and Peter met at Empire State University, a fictional school attended by Marvel characters like Emma Frost, Squirrel Girl, and Johnny Storm. Though their first meetings were standoffish, the two eventually bonded over their shared love of science. Soon, they began dating. As a romantic interest for Peter Parker, Gwen differed greatly from Spider-Man's previous paramours. A science major herself, Gwen was attracted to Peter's intellect rather than any superpowers. This is in stark contrast to Mary Jane, attracted to Peter's persona as Spider-Man, thereby making the two love interests a manifestation of Peter Parker's ceaseless battle between power and responsibility, as Uncle Ben warned him about. Gwen's romance with Peter Parker also carries with it additional stakes in that her ill-fated police captain father, George Stacy, dies as a result of Peter's actions. His dying words beg Spider-Man to protect Gwen. Gwen Stacy's romance with Peter not only carried dramatic stakes for the web-slinger's comic book story, but she was meant to have an even greater role. Mostly due to Stan Lee's own preference for Gwen, Parker's blonde-haired beau played a central role in the stories of Spider-Man until readers of Marvel Comics showed a greater interest in the more carefree, wild Mary Jane. Needless to say, the decision to kill off Gwen Stacy shocked comic book readers around the world. But this became far more than just another plot twist in the serialized storytelling of Peter Parker's life. As Arnold T. Bloomberg described in his 2003 essay The Night Gwen Stacy Died, The End of Innocence and the Birth of the Bronze Age, the death represented a time when a defeated hero could not save the girl, when fantasy merged uncomfortably with reality, and mortality was finally visited on the world of comics. On a wider scale, the storyline would herald a huge shift in comic book storytelling, one that coincided with the end of the Silver Age and the beginning of the Bronze one. A major distinction between these two periods was in their tone. The stories of the Silver Age were dramatically affected by the 1954 Comics Code Authority, forcing content to become more regulated and squeaky clean for audiences. In contrast, the Bronze Age was much darker, with consequential moments such as Gwen Stacy's death becoming the norm. Gwen also became the first of many romantic interests to be killed off for the sake of a male character's story. This would later become such a cliche that it earned the name the Gwen Stacy syndrome. While the consequences of Gwen's death would be felt for decades to come, for Peter Parker's more immediate future, it meant new threats. Regarded as another pivotal moment in the history of Marvel Comics, House of M was released in 2005 and written by Brian Michael Bendis, creator of Miles Morales, Jessica Jones, Riri Williams, and others. The series centers on the mental breakdown of the Scarlet Witch, forcing the Avengers and X-Men to band together to subdue her. However, it also features a big plot twist for the story of Peter Parker, one that brings Gwen Stacy back into the fold. Ultimately, the group's failure to stop the Scarlet Witch results in reality being shaped to give every superhero a new life in a world where mutants are the superior race, ruled by Magneto. One of the Avengers impacted by this change is Peter Parker, who wakes up in bed next to Gwen Stacy in one of the biggest cliffhangers of the comic book storyline. In other multiverses, Gwen Stacy's story isn't that of the damsel in distress, but the hero herself. Those who have seen Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse got a deep dive into the events that led to Gwen Stacy on Earth 65 to become Spider-Gwen, but few probably know that those events have their origins in Marvel Comics. Spider-Gwen made her debut in 2014's Edge of Spider-Verse comic book series, where the heroic character is introduced in a similar manner to the opening sequence of Across the Spider-Verse. While the Gwen Stasis of Earth 616 and Earth 65 are perhaps the most significant variants of Peter Parker's love interest in Marvel's comic book universe, the character has nevertheless remained an important recurring figure throughout the multiverse. Some Gwen Stasis have become respected superheroes like Spider-Gwen, while others have even become antagonists towards Peter Parker or other variants of Spider-Man in other alternate dimensions. Until the third Sam Raimi-led Spider-Man film in 2007, Peter Parker's love interest in the movies had been Kirsten Dunst's Mary Jane, with whom he famously shared a sultry upside-down kiss in the first film. Despite occasional flirtations with Peter's Daily Bugle co-worker Betty Brant, the biggest threat to Peter's relationship with MJ came in Spider-Man 3 via Gwen Stacy, played by Bryce Dallas Howard.